Oops.
Oops. Hello. Welcome, everyone. I always feel weird talking at the very beginning because literally no one is here. They're all going, oh, it's live. So it's 7:01 p.m. On Tuesday, May 2nd, 7:01 p.m. on the East Coast, I should say. We have some West Coasters and some Central people. Anyway, if you're just joining us, please say hi. Let us know you're here. Tell us where you're from. We always like to give about 2 minutes to get started and let people get in the room, grab a seat. There is virtual snacks at the virtual bar. So feel free to grab. Hey, Deirdre, good to see you. And we have a really spectacular conversation tonight. It is a conversation that many of you asked for, and I think it's definitely a good one, that of navigating family dynamics, whether family, friends, siblings, whatever, just don't understand. They don't understand OCD. They don't understand the diagnosis. And, you know, most difficultly, they don't necessarily want to understand their fixed beliefs. And so we'll be talking all of those things. Hi, Dave. Hi, Mike. Hi, Shelly in Louisiana. Eric Frank. Hey, Amy. Good to see all of you. Got just one more minute. My cats are trying to break into their room. I can hear them like clawing at the door. But after we had the butt lick incident of 4 months ago, we're not letting them in this time.
I'm not asking. I'm just.
Wait, was that the incident where you were talking about something really delicate and it just?
I was talking about like self-compassion and holding my heart. Like behind me, my cat was cleaning its butt, and like I had no idea this was happening. It's
so good.
It's so good. It really is. Hey, Matt B. Virtual price for virtual snack. Great question. $150 for your virtual snacks. We'll put a PayPal link in the comments. So if you're just joining us, feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're from, and we'll get started. Have a lot to cover tonight. Last 45 minutes will be Q&A. So get your questions ready. Feel free to load the comment thread. Sean Shinnick in the house. Good to see you, Sean.
Hey, Sean.
Here. All right. So with all of that, welcome to Tuesday night's town hall. This is Navigating Family Dynamics. I am Ethan Smith, the national advocate with the IOCDF, and your host for this evening. Real quick, let's get through some housekeeping so we can get to the good stuff. So this town hall is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you're in a crisis or ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room. You can call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. We also want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And as a note, this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and it's being recorded. So keep that in mind as you divulge personal information. Michael Schramm's in the house. Ethan, again, didn't say hi. I did say hi to your Deirdre. Absolutely. First person I said hi to was Deirdre. Don't you try that on me. Okay. So let me get started. We have some amazing panelists for you this evening. So let me just make some introductions. First, we have Adira Wexelman. Adira led a regular high school life playing varsity sports, excelling in the classroom, enjoying time with friends and family. However, following her junior year of high school, symptoms started to suddenly appear. She was diagnosed with OCD. After receiving intensive local treatment in her hometown, she decided to attend the OCDI's residential treatment program twice, becoming much less severely impacted by her disorder. Though there are still plenty of ups and downs, the good days much outweigh the bad now. Through her treatment, she has come to accept her disorder as one of the many pieces that make up who she is as a person and better navigate the relationships with family and friends as it regards her OCD. Adira has been attending the IOCDF annual conferences since 2009 and spoken on panels since 2012. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and one-year-old son who literally just turned 1. Thank you, Adira, for joining us.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Excited you're here too. It's been a minute. I always love seeing our favorite faces. Next we have Carrie Smalley. Carrie Smalley is mom to Tom Smalley. I know you thought it was his younger sister. It is not. Carrie is a lead. Carrie Smalley is mom to Tom Smalley. I should read these first. A lead advocate for the IOCDF, but this isn't about Tom. This is about Carrie. Carrie's been an advocate for mental health for the time Tommy was first diagnosed with depression when he was 10 years old and when he was diagnosed with OCD at the beginning of his second year in high school. Instead of keeping it quiet, she shared Tom's story and journey with everyone in her community on social media. What transpired was amazing. Calls, emails, and messages on social media, all asking for assistance with their loved ones. She has helped educate parents and other family members about OCD, and while supporting families as they navigate OCD. Apparently, Eric is not a fan of Carrie's bio. I'm sure
Because he doesn't like me.
Yeah, we'll live with that uncertainty, Carrie. As an independent college counselor, Carrie works with high school students, assisting with the entire college process. Many of her students have learning plans in place, learning plans in high school, and she works with them to obtain the goals that they set for themselves while supporting and guiding them through the process. Carrie, we're so grateful to have you.
Thank you so much for letting me be here. I appreciate that.
You're letting me be here. Carrie's son, Tom Smalley, is a lead advocate for the IOCDF and co-founder of Anxiety in Athletes, a group that I am not a part of. He received, I've
been recruiting him for years. It's just he's just at this elite level that he won't join.
Well,
so
newsflash, there's 2 adjectives in there, and one of anxiety is the one that I have. So you can guess. Anyway, he received his Master's of Science in Exercise and Sports Science from Merrimack College in North Andover. Smalley is certified strength and conditioning specialist through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. In addition, he holds his USAW Level 1 weightlifting coaching certificate and a Level 1 coaching certificate from Precision Nutrition. Tom, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here with your mom. Oh, that's not all. Hold on. Part 2. There was a page break. After being diagnosed with OCD in 2014 at the age of 16, Smalley has since been an outspoken advocate for breaking the stigma surrounding mental health, particularly in athletes. Tom was the recipient of the 2019 IOCDF Hero Award and continues to speak at the annual OCD conferences as well as various schools around the country. Smalley has a strong passion for weightlifting and began competing in 2021, 8 years after his mental health forced him to put a halt on his athletic career. Okay, thank you, Tommy, so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Ethan. I appreciate
I read this and I'm kind of pissed because I carried a box up from Costco up my stairs, and I'm like, literally my abs have been sore for 2 days. And so whatever. Anyway, last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Eric Storch. Dr. Storch is professor and Mackenbell Presidential Endowed Chair in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Baylor College of Medicine. He serves as vice chair and head of psychology and co-directs the Obsessive Compulsive and Related Disorders program at BCM. Dr. Storch specializes, that'd be great. Dr. Storch specializes in the nature and treatment of childhood and adult obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, misophonia, PTSD, and anxiety among youth with autism. In addition to over 850 published articles and chapters in 22 books, he has received multiple federal grants to investigate treatment efficacy, mechanisms of action, genetics, bioethics, innovative approaches to phenotyping, and how to enhance outcomes for those struggling with OCD and related conditions. Dr. Storch, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, the part you left out is I was a weightlifting TA, despite not being able to bench over 100 pounds my senior year of college. So got 2 credits for it.
Well, now I'm going to challenge Tom to bench press your 850 articles. And
bench press thing. I thought actually Tom looked a little soft. I didn't want to say it.
Oh, all right, starting with the burns. On that note, and I love all the conversation. So if you're just joining us, tonight's conversation is navigating family dynamics. This was birthed from your questions regarding how to talk to your family and friends about your OCD diagnosis, especially when they don't understand or they've been a barrier, an obstacle to resonating, relating. You felt stigmatized, you felt judged. So with that, I'd like to start asking some questions of our panelists. Feel free to leave questions in the comments. We will definitely get to them in about a half hour or so. So first, well, I want to start with Dr. Storch quickly. Dr. Storch, in the children and adults that you've treated, I mean, you've obviously encountered a fair amount of resistance among parents and caregivers and friends. And is that common?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it is. Now, the reality is most parents are simply wonderful and they just want to figure out how to help their kids. Sometimes there's differences among parents. You know, some parents are a little bit more firm, some parents are a little bit more kind of soft, and really the sweet spot is somewhere right in the middle. But it is normal. You know, I always think about when we first started having our kids, no one really taught us what to do. I mean, I think there are general rules of thumb, like don't beat them, feed them on a reasonably regular basis, and then put some clothes on them, or at least, you know, blanket over them. But like, other than that, no one teaches you what to do if your kid's anxious. And so for a lot of parents, it's sort of a shock there at play. And when you're shocked, you don't always know how to respond. But I think it's a normal reaction. It's not something we should pathologize, but as clinicians, we really need to reach out to family members and support them, inform them, make them experts on this stuff as best as we can, and allies in what we do as best we can.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. And I see your questions loading in the comment thread, so please keep them coming. I will go back up and start in the order that they appear. Oh, for some reason, I thought that was a Yoo-Hoo at first. It's a Topo Chico Dr. Storch is drinking, but I thought it was Yoo-Hoo, and I was like, that's amazing. Dr. Storch drinks Yoo-Hoo. Now we know the secret is.
Was that what was in your Costco box?
Katie told me that I complained for 2 days about it. It's true. I actually complained for 2 days about it. Adira, I know that you experienced, various responses from your family as you began your journey with OCD and navigating it. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your own story.
Yeah. So I, as Ethan said, had, variety of experience, and same with what Dr. Storch just said. It's like your parents sort of, as a parent, you don't know where to go with this. And oftentimes for myself in particular, this was like a really sudden onset of OCD. I mean, I really had no symptoms, and then all of a sudden things spiraled out of control and got really severe really quickly. So it was kind of just a shock for everyone. And so I think the hardest thing, one of the things in particular about OCD that's so challenging is what your parents or other family members want to do to help you. Oftentimes makes you feel better in the moment, but is not what is sort of the correct treatment for actually addressing like the root of the OCD problem. So that was definitely sort of like the main focus of the battles amongst my family about OCD. I mean, I had parents who are, very much wanting to help me and support me however they could, but oftentimes how they were doing it was it was mostly just hard for my OCD, and therefore, turned into me lashing out and sort of digging my feet in even deeper and pushing back. So something that was really helpful for me was involving them in the treatment. At the time, when I first started receiving treatment, I was a minor, so they had more sort of legally more ability to be involved in the treatment. But as I got older, I did still want them involved in the treatment as much as it would help me, because it was sort of just like another accountability partner for myself. And just having them, be a part of the treatment and hearing directly from the doctors what was helpful, because a lot of times I think a lot of people can attest, OCD and just totally outside in anything in life, we often sometimes it means different depending on who it's coming from. So I could say the exact same thing to my parents as the doctor might say to them, but it means more sometimes coming from different sources. So that was something that was really helpful for myself and my family, sort of navigating the OCD. And then the last thing I'll add about this is also just like educating others. So my now husband, at the time when I told him that I had OCD, my symptoms were pretty at bay, but so he never really saw like the full extent of what it could be. And then there were times when my OCD would sort of flare up again, and it did become evident to him. And just sort of me as the person with OCD, it's a lot, because you're having to not only go through what you're going through, but also for me in particular, I felt like I needed to take on that role of being an educator to those around me, because ultimately it was going to be better for me long term to make sure everyone was on the same page, understood what was happening, understood what things that they could do to help, things that they were doing that were maybe hurting, and just how to best for us all to live together, because we all love our family and friends, and we want to make it a good situation for everybody.
Thank you, Adira. Out of curiosity, when you got the diagnosis, did you notice a difference in the way your mom reacted and your dad reacted?
Definitely. They're also just very different people. So that's also an interesting sort of, and now myself as a parent now, it's interesting to sort of see how myself and my husband react to different situations. So I fully understand it, but they did, but they were both doing what they felt like was helpful at the time, but it maybe wasn't the most helpful thing. But yeah, certainly sort of navigating that difference. And also with, I have two brothers, and sort of seeing the different ways that they reacted to it too was also interesting. And it can be hard. I actually have a twin brother who I'm really close with, who most of the time was very supportive of me, but sometimes would get just so angry that I couldn't control he would just get so frustrated at my behavior. And he's like, I just don't understand, how do you not get that this is just, a voice in your head? How are you letting this control you the way that you are? And so that definitely was a source of a lot of tension amongst the two of us, even though we are really close. So yeah, it's definitely navigating all of the different relationships as well as the different ways people react is certainly something to be aware of as well.
It's a great point, Adira. When we talk about it, I'm just sitting here realize, wow, we really are responsible for a lot of there's a lot of responsibility put on us as the individuals that are struggling, right? Because if you think about, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't have a lot of experience, but if you think about cancer or other disorders, you go to the doctor, your family goes with you. At some point, doctors explain everything, they take notes or whatever. But so much of the education is put on us initially, especially, and not only that, but we have to navigate different personalities, to your point. So it's like, what we say to our mom is different than what we say to our dad. And it's the same with Dr. Storch, as he's navigating different personalities and how different people were raised in their own reactions, which is their feelings are valid. We're not here to judge their feelings. It doesn't mean that they're helpful, though, their actions. Hi, Carrie. So let's actually, Tom, let's start with you, because let's go backwards. So tell me about a little bit about
Tommy first.
It's going to happen. Let's talk about you about, as you started to get your diagnosis and what your relationship was like with your parents. And I'd love to hear, at first from her side, from your separate sides of what you were perceiving, and then we'll come together. So go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the general thing is that OCD is really, really isolating, as we know, right? So, growing up with OCD, even up until I was diagnosed, I didn't really know what was going on. I thought I was the only one that had those thoughts, right? And just like many of us do. And so that's why I think, talking about OCD with the parents and having the family unit involved is so crucial, because we're already so isolated as is. So to not have any sort of support system is even a bigger challenge to face head on. But for me, I think it was definitely, some of the thoughts I didn't want to tell my parents, right? I mean, I think if you're I had sexual intrusive thoughts, I don't want to tell my parents I'm afraid I'm going to rape somebody. That's just not, if they don't know OCD, that's alarming to them, right? That's, red flags are going across their mind, we don't know what our son's going to do. So until they're educated enough, I think once they were educated more, I started, and the more they sat in on therapy with me, the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes each time, I think the more willing I was to open up about my thoughts and try to help them understand what my thoughts were and a different type of thoughts I was having. Because I think it's painful to tell your parents your thoughts, because even if they're irrational, something like sexual intrusive or violent intrusive thoughts they sound vulgar, and they're painful to me to hear in my own head. How my thought is, how the heck would my parents feel hearing them?
Thank you for sharing that, Tom. Yeah, it's so interesting. I shared literally everything with my parents from the minute I could talk. So it's always interesting to hear people every time I talk to somebody, it's like, oh, you haven't told my parents that. I'm like, what? I would have, so we all have different.
He tells me everything now.
No,
I know.
For sure. So, and I just want to encourage, for anyone that's watching, please know that we'll have an open Q&A probably at 7:45 or 7:50 Eastern. So please feel free to ask questions as we have this conversation. So Carrie, hearing that from Tom, and then thinking about, when he was first diagnosed and how you received that information, how it maybe didn't or didn't make sense to his behavior prior to that, and then navigating that from forward.
Okay. So those that know or don't know, Tom had depression, was diagnosed with depression when he was 10. And so he was seeing a therapist for that. So that was pointed out. Both of my brother and my sister-in-law were special ed teachers, and they are the ones that kind of said, Tommy seems a little bit off, but they didn't even mention OCD. And he was, like I said, he was 10. So I immediately, attacked that. That's like, let's go to a therapist, that's fear, it just broke my heart. He was always such a happy, smiling, laughing little boy. Now we know, right? That's probably he had OCD and he couldn't figure it all out. So when we heard that he was officially diagnosed with OCD, was from the first therapist, definitely told us, one of the first, second one, I guess, said he had OCD. But Tommy is the one that told me he had OCD. I don't know if he remembers that. It's very funny. Teenagers, whether they have OCD or not, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, their account of things is different than sometimes, what I saw, whatever. So he told me, he said he had looked it up and he had OCD. And I was like, no, you don't. I did say that. I said, no, you don't. Because all I knew OCD to be was that you were neat and tidy and you wanted things in order. And have you seen your room? There's no way you have OCD. Sorry. So I definitely did not think he had OCD. As time went on, his brother left for college. And that's when we started really noticing behaviors. And I did more reading and things were getting very, very bad. His brother left. He was heartbroken. His best friend had gone to University of Michigan. We live in Connecticut. That was a really tough time for him. My father was very sick. There was a lot going on in my home. So I sent him, I started on a quest to get him help. I had to find somebody that could treat him. I don't know if Tommy remembers all this, but I would leave him at school, drive him to school, and have to push him out of the car, literally push him out of the car. And it broke my heart. But honestly, I felt that he was more safe there because he had such a good support system at his school than he was at that time. I was still working part-time. I just didn't want him to be alone at home. But every time he got out of the car, do you remember what we did? He would turn around and I would give him the thumbs up. Every day after school, I would give him the thumbs up and he'd give it back to me. And it was just like me saying, you got this today. Let's just attack it today. And I started calling therapists until I could find one for him. And I started educating myself so that I would know what OCD was. So when he says my mom wouldn't have understood that, I would have, because everything that he did, I always could see what was OCD and what wasn't. It didn't take long at all. A few therapy sessions, exposure response therapy, a few times doing that, I was really able to tell when he was being Tommy with OCD and when he was just being Tommy. So I definitely felt like he could have told me anything. What was hard, I think, and I do think that, Eric was saying, every mom or dad wants to make their child better and wants them to be better, every mother. So sometimes I think the lack of wanting to help comes from a place of fear. And I think there was a little bit of that for me. I was really fearful of the medication. I would do research and be like, what, he has to take that? How long? What? What's it going to do? What happens if this I was afraid. But I think that, the more reading I did, talking to his therapist, going to support groups and things like that, starting my own, I think that was definitely helping me come to terms with it. He's 25 now. So that was 10 years ago, just shy of 10 years. I can tell you that I'm not used to it. I'll never be, as a mom, I'll never be used to it. I'll never be used to the fact that I can't fix it and that it's lifelong. Like, I will never get used to that. And I think sometimes, and he'll agree with this, his father was amazing, so good. with him. But every time Tommy would do something new, he'd say, why is he doing that now? Why is he doing this? And I would just look at him and I'd say, honey, he has OCD. Remember, I know, but why now this? Why now that, And, but we were always on the same page. I have to say, you have to be as a unit, you have to be. If you're not, we joke, we're as much relieved that we're still married as we are that Tommy is living and thriving with OCD. Truly, because it's not an easy thing. It really isn't. But I don't know. I do really believe that parents want to do the best that they can and really want to help. I do think it comes from a place of fear, though, Ethan. I really do.
I think that's good insight, and I appreciate you sharing some of your experience with Tom and Tom's experience with you. Gosh, there's so much to unpack here, and I want to turn to Dr. Storch. So, how important is it for especially parents of minors with OCD, but even adult children, to be involved in treatment and recovery?
Yeah, I think it's massive. So here I am, somewhere in my early 30s, and I probably talked to my mom twice today. I want to appreciate that no one really smiled when I just threw that early 30s.
I was.
He looks young, but no. And here's the thing. I called my mom. My mom broke her wrist. I want to check in how she's doing. Then I want to complain about, my wife. Don't tell her I said that. We're not recording this, right? And so on and so on. Now, that's a health. We have a good relationship. And if something happened to me, she'd be here in a heartbeat. And so that's sort of how we want to approach this. You said something, Ethan, that was really smart. Many things were really smart, obviously, but when you were referencing cancer, and for whatever reason, or set of reasons in behavioral health, we think of it completely different than any other field. So, God forbid, one of us has cancer or some other serious disease. Everyone drops everything. The people who love us the most come there, and some are going to be terrific at it, and some will be less so. But they will surround us with some element of support. And for whatever reason, and maybe, Tom gave a good example of, symptoms are a little bit unclear or hard for some to get, or you're worried about how others will respond in normal reactions. We've taken this general approach of saying, well, let's just focus on the individual. It's like, no, 100% of the time it involves everyone around them. And so in the instances in which there's a supportive, loving family, which fortunately is most of the time, we want those assets. We want them because there's no one who will work harder than a worried mother or father in getting their kid better. They'll read everything, they'll go anywhere and do anything they can. On the flip side, that minority of times in which you have sort of parents that just really don't get it, and I saw a few comments in the chat. I did want to point out that Ethan, I think, inhibited my ability to respond to chat comments. So I can't reply.
You can't, not until you have 6 minutes.
Right? Good. That was purposeful. But no, joking aside, I think even in those scenarios, we still have to figure out where to kind of place family members that you can't sort of bring over to the good side. Maybe it's their own stuff. Maybe they're just not resilient or as resilient as many of us are, because you got to be to kind of deal with this stuff. And so that said, we can't ignore that. We have to figure out where to place the individual that just is going to say, stop that, don't do that. Okay, that's their thing. How do we kind of put them in our whole map of how we're going to fight OCD? So what I do know is we can't ignore it. We can't pretend like they don't exist. And so instead, we want the supporters and the allies to be really close to us, and we want the non-supporters to again have their place and their role. And if we don't directly address it, we won't be able to achieve it. And I think that's one of the things that I really view my role, and the people I teach, their role is hey, embrace the family. And you know what? It doesn't matter how old you are. When we first started, Carrie was telling a story about basically keeping Tom's dad alive by making sure that he eats like really healthy, even though he seems like he sort of was bummed by that. And Tom, just so you know, I'm deducing that he's excited when you come, partially because of you, but partially because the good food gets purchased that he can eat. But that's part of it, right? I mean, mom's keeping dad from eating crap, which I know I would do if I was in charge, which I'm not. So like that's a big part of how we want to bring family together to really kind of put our best foot forward from a health standpoint, whether physical, or with regards to OCD.
Thank you, Dr. Storch.
Yeah.
Before I continue on, is anybody have thoughts to any of the conversations we've had so far? Dear, anything on your mind?
I mean, I completely agree with what everyone's saying. The relationship between Tom and his mom, Carrie, is very similar to myself with my parents. And it's, it's so important to have parents who are so like willing and wanting to help. Like my mom went to IOCDF conferences before I ever did because I was like, this isn't that big of a deal. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. But it clearly was a big deal that, she could sort of see further beyond that. So it's wonderful to have family who is supportive, but then also to what Dr. Storch was saying, when there is family who's not, or who, just doesn't understand figuring out sort of how to navigate that. And it made me think of my husband who, not that he didn't want to help, he just didn't know how, and hasn't always been the most like, he's not the type of person to go get therapy himself. I mean, I'm sure if he really needed it, he would go, but it's sort of taken back to my point about sort of like educating people, and sort of taking, the good from what people are saying and take that, but, sometimes, parsing out what they're saying as well. And, just because someone else is saying something that's sort of different from how you would go about it, try to keep a good family spirit and, take the good that comes with it and try to, as much as you can, sort of take the stuff that is not helpful to you and keep it to the side.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good advice and good insight. I think that, gosh, we all relate. Like my story is so similar too. And I think about what Carrie said. My parents' way of helping when I was struggling was enabling and reassuring because they didn't know what was happening and they just didn't want me to hurt. And then to Carrie's point, when I got better, when I got into treatment, so challenging for them to learn how to undo all of that behavior. I mean, they had 31 years of my OCD training them on how to treat it, right? So, I mean, it's just so challenging. And in a way, and this is to Eric's point, it's not, I believe, and I think Dr. Storch would agree, and all of you would agree that, not only should parents be involved in treatment, but I think in many instances, parents need treatment themselves around the experience, right? Because I know that, again, my OCD trained my parents from birth. And I know that 25 years old to 31, that's scary that Tom's 25 now, but whatever. Anyway, 25 to 31, my parents were married to my OCD. They weren't married to each other, right? So what was brilliant, and I got so fortunate when I finally found the proper therapy, is not only did they treat me, but they treated my parents, because there's just a whole lot of behavioral learning that they had to sort of work through themselves. And I think that was so clutch in my own experience and being able to get better and have a healthy adult relationship now. I
want to say that, I do think that's such a good point. I think the reason why, and Tommy, you didn't almost destroy our marriage, dear, but I think the important thing to remember is that actually, and my mom always used to say things like this, like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I actually think the opposite. I think our little family unit, his older brother would be the one to call Tommy to let him know he was worthy and of living and he loved him. And, he would come home and take care of Tommy so that my husband and I could go out to dinner. I think there is a thing about like this unit that you have to become. And then once he was able to, go off to college, and then he went to get his master's, I kind of was left here going, now what do I do? Like, I've got exactly right. And I went to therapy. And, I think it was the best thing I could do for myself, truly, because I do have a lot of behaviors that I have to, he's an adult now. I can't, I still parent both of my sons. I'm sorry. It's just an Italian mother thing. But for the most part, I really think that exactly right. I had to relearn how to parent him as an adult with OCD, because there's a difference now, right? I'm very fortunate, Eric, that Tommy calls me a lot. Well, he texts me more than he calls me, but I'm in touch with my kids often. And they are constantly oversharing, and I love every minute of it.
Again, I'd like to encourage everyone to ask questions. We have an incredible panel full of insight and at least in Eric's case, decades of experience. So please feel free. We'll get to questions shortly. I do want to call out, because I love this comment, and this is a conversation I wanted to have discussed. So I promise I'm not skipping ahead. I will see everybody's, but I wanted to highlight Amy Ellickson's comment at 7:20 p.m. and feel free to pull that up, Amanda. So Amy wrote, I'm breaking my own rule. Eric's pissed at me right now. Most of my family sees OCD and other mental illnesses as a character defect. That's why I find support groups helpful, because people there understand, which is really powerful. And then she goes on at 7:21 p.m. and this is a really powerful statement. I accept my family's perspective, but I don't buy into it, and I love them anyway. So the reason I want to highlight this is, and I want to throw this at first to Dr. Storch, but then the group, is so many times we get comments and streams and emails saying, my parents don't get it. I need them to understand what I'm going through. Like that word need, not just one. I need, and whether you're an adult child or a kid, obviously being a minor is a different story, but I need them to understand. I just can't get them to understand. What do I do? They judge me. They stigmatize me. They think it's a character flaw or a character defect. What do I do? So we always have insights into how to help educate parents and things like that, right? But Amy brings up a really powerful point, and I would argue that it might be hard to get to this place of acceptance where maybe they won't ever understand really, or want to understand. And can I be okay with that? I mean, Dr. Storch, there's a level of like, when do you give up isn't the word, but when do you kind of say to yourself, or when would you tell a client, we've tried, but ultimately this is your life. And at a certain point, I know that's what you want, but that's just not what's going to happen. So we have to move. Like, where does that happen? Yes, go on.
Yeah. And hats off to Amy. I mean, how hard and how really heroic to be able to persevere through that and sort of come out with a reframe. Here's how I think of it. There's no set time, but I sort of think about it to the point where you've tried again, and then a third and fourth time, and nothing's budging. And there's one of my favorite sayings by an old psychiatrist, neurologist, Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust. And that saying is, when you can't change the situation, you have to change your perception of it, to paraphrase. And I think that's how I think of this, both clinically, in my own life, and so on. We can't change the way someone sees something. We can give them information. Hopefully they can integrate that information, but maybe not. And frankly, there are a lot of people who can't integrate, new information, whatever topic we're talking about. And so I think when you've tried again, and then again and again, at that point you have to think about, okay, well, that's that. And you also have to come to terms with how you're able to view that person. Like, can you forgive and sort of say, okay, there are all these great things. This isn't one of them. And so I'm going to focus on the great here. Or is it so central for you that you really can't get past that? And I think everyone's going to be an individual in that. And there's no wrong answer to that. But it does speak to this notion of, all right, well, if you can't change that situation, change the way that person is or sees you or sees your OCD, then it's all about changing the way you're seeing them and then engaging with them. And so it's all just an individual approach. But again, it's that earlier point of if you just sort of try to push them to the sideline, it's just not going to work. You have to figure out how to actively approach this. And we think that sort of active pursuit in whatever therapeutic modality you're engaged in or so on. But it's really this notion of you keep moving forward. And sometimes you'll, slip and go wrong, but you keep kind of plowing forward towards your goals in a kind of consistent, coherent manner. Hard to arrive, I think, at these outcomes, but but again, thinking of how you sort of conceptualize that person or and then fit them in your life.
And it also is in black and white, right? You don't have to dismiss your feelings. It doesn't matter that you won't feel that you wish somebody would understand you or want to know what's going on. You can still want that, but there's wanting that and then moving forward and taking actions toward your values. And there's wanting that and feeling stuck and constantly wanting to change someone else's mind when you necessarily may not be able to. But yeah, hats off to Amy. I read that and I thought that was really powerful to come to that place. And, maybe they will come around down the road, but I think that's a really valuable lesson in that comment. So I really appreciate that. We'll turn to questions in just a second. I had a question for Carrie and Adira, and I don't remember what it is. So maybe we'll start the questions, then I'll come up with it. Oh, I remember. So Tom, it was for Tom and Adira, but Carrie, I'll turn to you in a second. What would be your suggestion for individuals that, would say, listen, I'm learning about OCD. I have a therapist or I read a book or support group, but my parents just don't want to hear it. They don't understand. And Michael Schramm left a good comment about this, but what would you suggest to individuals that say to you, how can I communicate this to my family?
Similar to what Dr. Storch said, I think you can't control people's reactions and their opinions, but you can control how you relay a message, and you can control how you carry yourself. And I think by controlling those things well and trying to educate them the best you can, I think that's, you leave no doubt and at least giving them the chance to learn. And then, but you have to understand that sometimes it's going to come at their pace. It might not be at the exact timeline that we want them to be supportive of us, but I think really just making sure that you love them, they're your parents, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be your best OCD support system. I think that's where you start leaning on support groups, because at the end of the day, you can't force someone to learn. But I think the more you open up to somebody, the further you're going to build that relationship, because relationships are built when the ego is dropped and the vulnerability is shown, right? So I think once that vulnerability is shown and you're able to share some of the thoughts, some of what you go through on a daily basis, your parents love you and they're gonna listen eventually. That's
beautiful. Adira, same question.
Yeah, I would say sort of similarly, and like everyone's been saying here, like I was kind of alluding to before, it's, if people don't get it, there's only so much you can do. You can try to do all you can to educate and to explain, but without having that like lived experience or just having, a different mindset, they aren't necessarily going to be on the same page. But to try to do what you can, and also, like Tom said, really leaning into support groups. So those around you who do understand and getting sort of that build up from them. And then another thing that for me in particular was helpful was, it's hard to sometimes realize that there's going to be a difference in opinion in how to approach the treatment or the ERPs or whatever it might be. But the thing for myself that really things started to align better for my family when I started to really dive into the treatment and they could start to see some of the changes. And once they could see changes, I think that they were a little bit more open to hearing, sort of open to some of what I was telling them. Because, it's hard when it looks like, I'm just struggling and I'm not even trying to do anything to get better. I can understand how that can be a really frustrating experience for parents. But once once they could see some improvement and really see that change, it seemed like it opened a lot of doors and there was better communication. So I know it's hard to do, but at least for myself, that was something that really started to help.
That's great insight, Adira. Thank you. Carrie, last question, then we'll go to questions from the viewers. What advice would you give to parents who maybe are watching this and are feeling like, I don't understand, my kiddo, or I do believe it's, something they can just, it's a decision they can just, will it, or maybe just confused and not even sure. What advice would you give to parents that are kind of struggling with the beginnings of this?
I think there is, like we said, there's a fear. I think there, unfortunately, is shame that goes with it too. And, I think the hard part, listen, I am definitely not the poster mother, here. I definitely had my own cries in the shower when Tommy wasn't around, and when I could just have my cry. And I definitely had my doubts. I think really educating myself was really what helped me. And ultimately, I think what a mom, what is your goal? What is your wish for your child? What do you want for your child? Do you want your child to get better, to have a full life, to be productive and thrive? That's what every mother wants. Every parent wants that. So if we can, I think parents are afraid of trying new things, trying therapy. I know in my own family, my mother told me to send Tommy to a priest, and Tommy had scrupulosity, so that was not really a good idea. So it wasn't until my mom came to hear Tommy speak that she apologized to me, and she said, I had no idea. And I kept saying, Ethan, I had told her 100 times, but until she could see it, until she could hear other people. So maybe what a parent might do, I just thought of this, is going to a support group and listening to other people talk about it. One thing my husband did was he read a lot. And then he would say, I was reading and this, Tommy's doing this. Is exactly, what they were saying in the book. And, we were constantly reaffirming our own thoughts. So I do think support groups for parents are so helpful. And I've, had parents in my house, just listening to them, people on the phone. And I know how exasperating it is. And like you said, you just want it to stop. You want them to stop their behavior. It's uncomfortable. It's scary. You don't understand it. Why can't you just stop? Just stop. I get it. And I've had parents just really frustrated that they wouldn't change, their child wouldn't change. And it wasn't until I said, you have to give them the tools so they can change. They can't do it on their own. Think about if you had, an illness that needed to be, you needed medication for, was not going to go away on its own. Well, you would go and get the medication so you could get better. Well, this is the same thing. You have to have the tools for your child so they too get a chance to live a life. Doesn't everybody deserve that, right? And it is hard. And I'm not making it sound like this is such an easy thing to do, because it's not. But I think you first have to say, what's your wish for your child? What do you want? Then picture it. How are you going to get there? What's your objective? What is it going to look like once he or she is doing better? What's that going to look like for your family, for your child? And what steps can you take to help him get there?
That's really good, Carrie. Thank you so much for that insight. We'll jump to some comments and questions. 7:10 p.m. Lola writes, how can we do better when family members start to not accommodate our OCD so we don't get too upset at them? I think that's a great, insightful question from Lola. I want to get a clinical perspective on that. But before I do, Tom was sharing beforehand that when he had OCD and he was a teenager, he was an asshole. So I feel like you might be an expert to start this question off. So what are your thoughts, Tom?
I mean, I think I'm probably still an asshole. No, I mean, I think the biggest thing to remember is I think we have to decipher reassurance and accommodation. And not blur the line, and make sure that you're able to constructively accommodate somebody instead of making things worse. And then when you don't accommodate the person with OCD getting too upset, I think taking a step back, like the thing that really happened a lot when I would get frustrated. And I think that's when, I was quote unquote an asshole. And, would say things I didn't mean, or, because the OCD was making me so frustrated. And I felt like because they weren't accommodating me, they weren't listening to me. I think taking a step back, taking a deep breath, understanding that maybe the way we're communicating isn't as effective. Maybe we need to sit in a therapy session together, or ERP session together, and discuss better ways of communication. But I think the person with OCD really has to understand that the family's doing their best. They might not have the education, the mechanisms to accommodate the OCD and understand yet. So I think the biggest thing to remember when you have OCD and your family is not accommodating, it's not always intentional. I think I got into the trap a lot of times that my family was out to get me, and that like they don't care to understand, when in reality it was really they're trying their hardest. But OCD is super tricky, right? And I think it was just taking some time for them to understand.
I think
Thank you,
something
Tom.
I would,
Go ahead, Adira.
oh, sorry, I was just going to say something I would add to that is I had a similar, whenever my parents or brothers or husband, someone gets upset or we get upset at each other basically over difference in how whether it's OCD, we came up with like a code name, like a code word to use. And so for me, I hate coconuts. And so my OCD was coconut. And so it was like, we could just say that word and just to kind of like snap us and remind us, like, we're all mad right now at coconut. We're not mad at me. We're not mad at my parents. We're not mad at any of us as like human beings, but we're angry at the OCD, and just to like remind and like rechannel that anger towards OCD as opposed to the people. I mean, it's very hard to do in the moment, but just something that helped me.
You nailed it. That's what I was going to talk about. I totally agree, Adira. Dr. Storch.
These are great perspectives. I said this to someone in my clinic today who came in, and they were expressing fear about essentially starting on this path that was unknown, that would go against their OCD. And they were fortunate to have a really close relationship with their parents. So the counsel I gave was, you don't need to know right now. All you need to do is look to your left and right of you, the people who love you, and trust them, that they're going to help you make the right decisions right now until you feel stronger to make them on your own. And so, in that moment, I think it was this idea of, okay, I can, rely on other strength to kind of get me to this, this next step or where I need to go. So I think that's one additional point I'd have. We try to teach parents or loved ones, not just parents, to be supporters, to be encouraging, and to really sort of remind the person that your OCD is your OCD. You're living with it. All we're talking about is having a different way of interacting with your OCD that's more adaptive and will get you to what's important to you, and that we're going to go slow. We're going to pull back accommodations slowly, not ripping out the tablecloth all at once, and that everyone's on board. For the most part, there are instances where you will get someone who says, I'm not going to change my OCD. And in that case, I really believe it's the family member's right to choose what they want to do. Like, they have a choice of how to engage with their loved one's OCD. And so that's sort of the last resort when someone's saying, no, I'm not willing to do any of this. And so in that case, we will work with parents, but at the same time, it's not rip it out. It's slowly pull it back while we're introducing more supportive, encouraging kind of framework in play.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a thought, Carrie?
I did. I don't know if Tommy remembers this, but when I would not accommodate his OCD, yes, he would not love me as much. But I would say, "You're tickling the bear," and I'm walking away. It was just me of saying to him, "I'm not going to accommodate it, and you're starting to tickle the bear. I'm walking away." And it was just something that you had a coconut. That was your word. But mine was like, you're tickling the bear. And it was a way of him, and usually he would laugh because it's such a silly thing to say, to this teenager. But it was me of saying, I'm not going to accommodate you, and I don't want to get you upset. You're tickling the bear, and I would just walk away. But when he did get upset about things, what does a mom usually want to do when their child is upset? Hug them, touch them. You can't do that. You have to walk away. The hugging we're a very touchy family. So hugging is a big thing in I don't know if you've ever had a Tommy hug, but it's probably one of the best hugs you'll ever get. And, I would want to hug him and I couldn't. I had to walk away. And sometimes less is more, I think. It really is when it comes to this. Less said, the less said,
I definitely want to. I normally don't talk this much, but I'm kind of invested in this question, so I just want to weigh in, and then we'll move on, and I'll shut up. But I always like to say, education and understanding that you're not your OCD, right? That as you're all saying, right? Once we have the education as the individual with OCD, that our parents are when they're not reassuring, when they're not accommodating, when they're not enabling, they're really trying to get us well, not make us sicker. It's against our OCD, not against us as a people. And I say that all the time, but I know for me in my own story, because not only was my OCD so pervasive, but I had this really major attachment issue with my parents. Like, I lived for my parents. I just wanted to be with them. And because how much enabling and engagement there was, when they sent me to residential, when they sent me off, when they sort of said, okay, you're on your own. And my OCD specifically was around, fear of hurting myself and harm and dying. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. And I'm sure everyone can relate to that. And so, suddenly I felt like the people closest to me that understood me, that had always been there for me, when really they were there for my OCD, right? But I didn't know that then. There for me, gave up on me, is what it felt like. And it was, I at that time, it was the lowest I'd ever been. I just felt like giving up at that point, because, well, if my parents aren't here backing me and they love me more than anybody, and I have this disease, then I have nothing. And so it's so hard in that moment, even though I sit here all the time and talk about this. And it really wasn't until sitting with that discomfort over time and realizing that my parents were going to live my life, I had to live my life, and understanding that, I was in control of my actions and behaviors, and really getting that rooted into me, and realizing that coming to a place where it's like, coming to a place where I understood that like, I love my parents, and I would never want anything to happen to them. But if something did, I would be okay. Like, I would be able to survive that, as opposed to needing and wanting and differentiating that. And that's kind of when I really was able to grow, and they were able to participate in my recovery. The last thing I'll say is, right when I got better, my mom and I, not right, but shortly after, we got in an argument. And we were arguing, and I got really heated. And in that argument, I told her to F off and die. And we paused a moment, and my mom goes, "That's great." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. Like, I really do. I want you to just like disappear." She's like, "Oh my gosh, you've grown so much." And then we started laughing, and we had a normal conversation. It was really funny, like totally diffused everything, but I'll never forget that. That was always really funny. But so I reckon it's so hard to understand, where parents are coming from, especially if it's been almost a fixed belief in our minds, because it's been so long since there's been that enabling and reassuring. I didn't move out of the home till I was 26 and lived back with them and all of that back and forth. So everybody has their own journey, right? But I just wanted to share that it is difficult to get to that place. 7:15 p.m. Eva writes, how do I best manage my feelings of guilt when my OCD burdens the lives of my kids? We were talking about this beforehand. They don't deserve a sick mom. I feel awful how my OCD intrudes and negatively impacts their lives. First of all, I'm sorry for how you're feeling right now, Eva. I probably muddled 7:15 p.m. Amanda. I talk really fast. Sorry. So I actually want to start with, well, does anybody, I want to turn to Dr. Storch, of course, from a clinical perspective, but Tom or Adira, do you have any initial thoughts on this, or even Carrie?
I mean, I think my first initial thoughts is that to give yourself some grace. I think you definitely need to give yourself some grace and understand that you're going to be a better mom because of what you're going through, because you're overcoming so much. I think you'll be able to teach your kids so many different lessons that a lot of kids don't learn, especially that early on. So you're going to shape their lives in such a positive way. So definitely just give yourself grace.
Yeah.
I'm going to just piggyback on that. I can say that I'm having going through this with Tommy, I'm definitely a better human being. I'm a better mom. And I see so much goodness in my whole family because of that. So you're worried about, my husband, my son. I mean, wasn't Sean just so self-centered before this whole thing, Tom? He's such a better, he's just more patient. Look, mom guilt is a real thing. We have it over everything that we do. I have mom guilt all the time. So I understand the guilt part. I unfortunately don't understand the OCD part, and my heart breaks for you because I know how you must be feeling. But, kids are resilient. I will say that. Tommy doesn't even know I had a therapy jar when he was younger for him. He doesn't even know about it. But I did, because I did make a lot of mistakes, and they're resilient. And like Tommy said, I truly believe he's right. In the end, they will be, you'll be a closer unit. They will learn how to live in society and know how disappointment works and how to be strong. And those are excellent lessons. Plus, you love your kids. I can see just by your comment how much you love them. They're always going to know that. And I think kids need to know that utmost, that they're loved. And I can tell how much you love your kids.
Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate that. Dr. Storch.
Yeah, great comments, and really echo Tom's point about having grace for oneself here. And Eva, it reminds me, when we had our first kid, I got my wife a T-shirt that said, "I make humans. What's your superpower?" And so here's sort of the thing: like, you made at least a couple kids, and you've raised them. You've kept them alive, which, after being with my kids over the weekend, who are both of our teenagers, like, they all made it, but there were a couple hairy moments, I will say. But I think, it's also using them as your motivation for being where you want to be. And so, look, no parent's perfect, and it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to struggle as a parent. There's no rule book that says you have to, always be strong or never have a weak moment. But using this as your motivation to fight back. And try to reclaim parts of your life that you want to reclaim, or domains with your relationship with your kid, or with your partner, or with your friends, or just for yourself. So I think really taking that motivation, putting it front and center, appreciating that it may be a course, it may take some time to get there, but letting that also be motivation as you're giving yourself that room, to let your imperfection really be perfection in a way. That'd be the other thing I'd add to it.
I appreciate that, Eric. And I agree, Eva, lots and lots of self-compassion. And gosh, I think that, I have friends with MS and, that have little kids, and they go through, periods of times where they go through a lapse or relapse in their own, despite them doing all the right things. And we'll talk, and they'll my 6-year-old doesn't deserve this. She deserves a mother that can play outside. Right. So it's like, you're not alone in feeling, first of all, you're not alone in feeling that level, feeling guilt around that. I'm not saying the guilt is valid, but I am saying you're not alone in that. Anybody with any type of, disease or disruption in their life that interferes with what we see as being normal, is challenging. What I will say, and this goes for everyone here, and I know Storch will back me up on this, and I do recognize, and people have talked about it, we talk about it, access to treatment, access to care, the affordability, and all the things. we know that it's a huge problem. We're doing everything we can to try to make it accessible and affordable and all of those things. But one of the super magical things about OCD is it's one of the most treatable mental health conditions. I think, I don't want to speak wrong. I've heard, Storch will correct me if I'm wrong, but it really is. And it's extremely treatable. And I think that's a real blessing. I think on one hand, I'm angry that I have OCD a lot of the times. And I'm also grateful that it's OCD, because as painful as it can be, and it can be painful at times, for sure. I think I have aha moments where it's like, well, how many people, like when my friend gets an MS, when something spikes with her MS, she has to drop everything, go into the hospital and get infusions for 3 days. And then that makes her sick for a week or 2 weeks. And then she starts feeling better. When my OCD spikes, there's a list of tools that I start to do. And like the fact that I can do these myself, like I can initiate this, I can choose to participate in accepting uncertainty and being uncomfortable. And I'm not saying I do it right all the time. And I'm not saying I don't drag it out, but I'm saying the fact that like the control of that is in my hands when we control so little, it's kind of powerful. And it's honestly kind of cool. It's like if I had to choose between a disease where I didn't have control and I had a disease where it's like, it's in my control. I don't know. I think that's pretty empowering, personally. And you can yell at me if you totally disagree, but I don't know if anyone has any other opinions on that, but I always think I feel very grateful and lucky and fortunate that A, I have tools, and B, I can call on them at any moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to bring up Matt B's comment at 7:21 p.m. because it starts a really good conversation. So Matt wrote, when I opened up to my parents about what I was going through with OCD, I showed them resources, articles online by clinicians, IOCDF YouTube videos, really helped them understand and support me. So I love this comment from Matt B at 7:21 for a few reasons. I think we talk about, thank you, Amanda. I think we talk about, individuals whose parents don't understand or family and friends don't understand. Where do I start? Where do I start? Helping to educate people that just don't get it and educate stigma. I think Matt raises like a great first place to start, which is, and Eric talked about it, and Adair talked about it, and Tom talked about it, which is, start with articles and YouTube videos and expert opinions and things like that. We're kind of deaf to our parents, and parents are deaf to us. It's kind of like hearing that thing from a stranger. It's like, oh, really? I should do that? Yeah, you're right. Okay. And so I think starting here is just such a great beginning part to introducing the conversation of what you're experiencing with your OCD and potentially how you can relate that information to other people. I don't know. Does anybody else have any thoughts on Matt B's comments?
That's great.
Perfect. The other thing I'll add, and it's something I feel pretty passionate about, is that I think that when we're struggling and at our worst in OCD, that's the time that we want to say, you don't get what we're going through. Like, you don't understand, right? And that's the moment we want to educate, when we're already like dysregulated, pissed off, triggered, and all of those things. And so I always feel like maybe the best time to educate is actually when we're not struggling, right? When we're having a moment, when we're feeling good, we're feeling even and not triggered, and to calmly sit down with parents or friends or whoever you want to talk to and say, hey, I would love to share something with you right now, and do it then. Because I think it's so easy to want to talk about it in that moment where you're feeling like you're misunderstood and so forth. So I think doing it with a calm presence when you have a lot of objectivity and insight is really helpful as well. Okay, lots of comments. Let me keep scrolling here. Usually I have the next one queued up. I apologize for failing the community.
It's a grace.
What?
That was a little grace right there.
Yeah, just a little. Katya wrote at 7:31 p.m. We have been left out of our daughter's treatment since age 14. Truly is because of lack of knowledge on OCD and the power of exposure and response prevention. She goes on to say, in Canada, they don't seem to understand how this affects the whole family. We want to get help, but we get shut out. And that's really crappy. And I'm so sorry to hear that.
Wow.
The good news is that a lot of teletherapists will work out of country. I know that there's still a financial component to that. And, obviously having insurance in Canada is, there's benefits and not benefits, as you're saying. But, I think with treatment, we have to get creative sometimes, and it's crappy that we do. It's the last thing you want to do when you feel like crap. But it's an option. So, but I'm sorry for that, Katya. I just wanted to highlight that. Ethan, you're amazing. Ethan, you're so much better looking than Dr. Storch. Here we are, 7:38 p.m. Did you want to say something, Eric?
No, I was agreeing with that.
Why were you reading the private chat?
All right. 7:38 p.m. Michael Schramm asked, question for Tom and Carrie. I still struggle to this day asking for reassurance from my parents. How do you all navigate that? Great question.
Mom, you can go first.
Okay, thanks. So one of the things that I learned by going to therapy with Tommy was how not to reassure him. Because when your child says to you, Tom, I hope it's okay that I share some of your thoughts. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You're just, okay. When your child says to you, I don't want to go to bed tonight because I'm going to wake up a llama, the first thing you want to say is, that's absolutely ridiculous. What have you been reading? What? I would say, well, you're going to have to go to bed and see if you're a llama. I don't know. And, it sounds absurd, but Tommy, that was one of his things in the beginning, was he thought if he went to sleep, he was going to wake up, a dog, a llama. And he would say to me, Mom, I know that this is not really going to happen, but in my head, so I would just say, we're going to have to wait and see. And that was a big one for me, Michael. I used to always say to him, we're just going to have to wait and see. And I also would say this, if, he would say, if I don't tap 5 times on this bench, my team is going to lose the basketball game. I didn't do this, compulsion. So now the team's going to lose the basketball game. And I would say to him, well, you didn't do that. So now we're going to have to wait and see. But I also would add, Tommy, wouldn't that be amazing if you had such power over these basketball players that they, you had these powers that you can make them either win the game or not? Can you imagine your team would just win all the time? And so I kind of did it in a way that I was very matter of fact. And I don't know, Tommy, if I was hurtful, but I just did it because I knew if I said to him, it's okay, Tommy, it's all right, don't worry, no, it's not going to happen, I knew that I wasn't going to be helping him. And my goal was always to help him. So, Tommy, how did you feel when I did that? Did you want to smack me or what?
No, I mean, I think it's, my mom makes a good point, Michael. It's like, I think she definitely had to, it's a hard pill to swallow for parents in general, right? The way to make your kid better is to literally not ignore, but force them to face their thoughts head on, and force them to face debilitating anxiety head on, right? And not give in to that. And so while that probably crushes, I look back and it probably crushed my mom to have to do that, to see me have to face that debilitating anxiety with that uncertainty after she wouldn't reassure me. But in the long run, that's really what's going to make me better, right? And I think if your parent can keep that in mind, that you're doing it for the long haul and you're doing it for them, what you're doing is the right thing. And I think, as for me, still struggling to ask for reassurance, I think I ask my girlfriend for reassurance more than my parents at this point. But I think when I'm home with them, I definitely catch myself. But I think that's an accountability thing to maintenance with ERP. I think is understanding that continue to do ERP and continue to show up and understand that OCD is always going to try to creep back in, right? So we can't let it.
I remember when you were in college, your roommate got strep throat, and you called me and you said, Mom, I'm really worried that I'm going to, get strep throat, or I think you even said AIDS. I was like, I don't know where you got strep throat from AIDS. And I said,
that's not where that comes from.
What, hon?
That's not where AIDS comes from.
No, hon, we'll talk about that later. I'll teach
I
you.
was afraid he was going to get OCD from
So,
which is
so
valid.
I said to you, I want you to go over to the doorknob and touch it and then lick your hand. And I thought he was going to like lose it on me. He's like, I hate you. I just hate you. I hate you. But I knew that I said, I bet that's what Amy would say. She said, no, you told me Amy told you to lick the doorknob, not even touch your hand. And I was like, well, I'm being nicer. You can lick your hand after you touch the doorknob. And you did it. I mean, we laugh about, then I got, I hang up the phone and I cried, because I wasn't there and I couldn't help you. I mean, Michael, your mom and dad are doing it. They don't want to reassure you, and if I hope you know that, like, they really don't want to. So you need to communicate with them, and try to teach them, how not to. And I can talk to your dad at the conference if you want, but, you really need to teach them how not to reassure you. And, it's going to hurt at first, it's going to be hard at first for you, but in time it'll lessen.
And that's what I was going to say is that you have to help them help you. And I was actually going to ask, because, they may not know or have been in agreement with you or understand even. And if they are no longer a resource for you to get reassurance, then you will hopefully stop seeking reassurance from them. But I was going to ask Deira, well, you had a thought just now, but I also wanted to ask you a question, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, just that reassurance seeking was something that I really, really struggled with and still do. And similarly in treatment, my providers, basically, my parents were involved in the treatment at the time, but basically it was like, we're going cold turkey. Like, when a deer asks you these questions, like, there should be no response. But then I started getting really tricky with, like, sort of sneaky with how I was asking the questions. And I'm like, oh, if they really thought something was wrong, they would have they would say something. So it was sort of my way of, I would change how I was asking it. But all of that is to say, I think one of the things that for me really started to help, and also because I felt that guilt of, like, putting my parents in this position, I know that they didn't want to be put sort of in between it all, was for me to just have to stop asking those questions. And, like, I literally now, like, still, like, I bite my tongue. I'm like thinking to myself, I want to ask this question so badly, but, like, what good does it do? So putting the onus a little bit back on yourself, which I know is no fun, but so that you're not even putting your parents in a position of trying to figure out how to answer it, but just really trying to, as much as you can, cut back on that seeking. Because this is going to sound, so I've had OCD for, goodness, like 15, 18 years or something. And I just recently, like, I was doing sort of a refresher on some treatment, and, like, it just sort of all came together that, like, my reassurance seeking is also just another compulsion. Like, I always knew that I did it, but I didn't think of it as an actual compulsion, but it is. So just being aware of it, and, you're not always going to be able to stop yourself, but the more you can be aware of your behavior, every little bit helps.
Well said. Totally agree with you. And Michael, we're excited to see you, and hopefully everyone else at the conference too. Real quick, I'll read. I just scrolled past it, but Alexandra's comment at 7:41 p.m. Alexandra wrote, yes, my family doesn't support me or understand my OCD, but I still love them. And as hard as it is, I know it's just them. Support groups have been so key for me in finding that support. And of course, Adira and Tom have spoken very highly of support groups as well. So thank you, Alex, and good to see you. Incidentally, I just saw Katya's, I hope pronouncing it, in Canada's comment about resources and Canada doesn't understand. I just wanted to quickly say, if you email the IOCDF, I was recently in Toronto doing some advocacy work and came across some really good resources. And I agree, I learned a lot about the system over there. And I don't want to speak to it because I'm just learning. But I do have some resources depending on what province you're in. So if you email the IOCDF and just asking them about that, they'll forward you forward the email to me, and maybe we can direct you to some support. So thank you for sharing that. Let's see here. I'm so embarrassed I have these things. Also, you reminded me, Adira, like into Michael's point, it's like, yeah, we're like really, I mean, we are very creative individuals. You know, individuals with OCD are generally extremely creative people, right? We know this, but we get really sneaky about asking for reassurance. And it was funny because last night I cooked salmon, and my big thing is undercooked food and food poisoning and all this stuff. And I made a new recipe, and it's the biggest salmon I ever cooked and all this stuff. And Katie, my fiance, saw a picture of the salmon on a text to my father. And she goes, "You didn't?" And I said, "Actually, no." I said, "Read it." And she was like, and it said like, "Hey, look what I made. It looks so good, blah, blah, blah." But she was like, "I totally wouldn't put it past you to like send him the picture, not even ask for reassurance, but then hoping if he says, wait, that's not done or that's not right, I don't even need to." And that, it reminded me of that because I actually wasn't doing that, but I have done that. And it's like, hey, well, I'm not going to ask for reassurance. I'm not going to say, "Hey, Mom, does this look cooked?" But let me send it to her and be like, "Doesn't this look delicious?" And if she says that's not cooked yet, then I'm like, okay, good, right? So it's like we're super sneaky in that way.
Yep.
Yeah, I can totally relate. So that was funny. Question for the panel. Kayla at 8:01 p.m. asks, and hey, Kayla, it's good to see you. What are the go-to resources for family and OCD that each of you has found most helpful in your journey and or work with OCD? Great question. So 8:01 p.m. Kayla. There we go. So yeah, let's just go around the room. I'll start with first of all, we'll put Eric's clinic up, and no, kidding. Dr. Storch.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking of what some of the good ones would be. I think Irene Wagner writes some great books. Ellie Leibowitz wrote a really nice book, and on really reducing accommodation, and I always think we have to target that as we treat anyone, whether it's a little kiddo or someone a bit older. Those are a couple that I like. And then honestly, what I love about the foundation, beyond the fact that like we're all super good looking, including everyone on this call, is really the resources are vetted. I mean, it's the people who've done the science, it's the people who've used it, and they have lived experience speaking towards it. I mean, you really sort of get that evidence from all angles. So it makes it really easy to direct families or individuals to really one place, to get the information that they need. And so that's one area that I'll direct folks back to, one place.
Great. Adira, what are your thoughts?
I think, for myself, I read a bunch of books going back to like the difference between parents. My mom, I think, has probably read every single book about OCD ever written. Those were, they were helpful for me, but I think the thing that was most helpful for me was just talking to other people with OCD. So I'm happy to be a resource for anyone. Just over the years, having gone to the conferences, met people through treatment, and just sort of talking to other people who truly get it, for myself has been one of the things that's most useful. And whether or not, we're not giving each other necessarily like great treatment advice, but at least just being a sounding board and someone to listen to us vent and who understands what we're all going through.
Well said. Tom?
I think, I'm going to plug obviously the IOCDF. IOCDF.org has a families and OCD section where they have a bunch of resources. But I think, Katya put the Kimberly Quinlan CBT school. I know that's everything Kimberly Quinlan does is terrific. Definitely recommend her resources. And really just, I think you could find a lot of resources at your fingertips these days, especially within the IOCDF community. So I think that's the best place to start looking.
Absolutely. Carrie?
So funny enough, when Tommy was diagnosed, there wasn't much other than the IOCDF, which I didn't even know about. So I went to social media, and believe it or not, there was a Facebook page, and I highly recommend anybody on Facebook. It was a family and friends and loved ones of OCD. And I joined that group, and I really educated myself, but I also was a safe place to talk about my son because it was a private group. And you had to be invited, and you had to have a loved one or someone with OCD. And I learned a lot, and I was able to really share a lot. And they were we're still like, I'm still very close friends with a lot of them. And they've been very supportive of Tommy, things that have happened to him over the years. And the other was, I went to during OCD Awareness Week, I went to my first conference, small conference at Yale. Your local places, your local hospital, I know Hartford Hospital in Connecticut, like, don't go too far. You don't always have to go so far away. There might be some support groups there. I also encourage parents to, I Googled OCD support group, and there happened to be one in my town. It wasn't a very good one, so I had to start my own, of course, but it was a start. So I think that researching that was really helpful. But I liked what everyone here is saying, talking to people, going to the first IOCDF conference, walking in. My husband and I felt like we finally were, okay. Like, everybody there understood what, we were like this common little, it was like a fraternity, I loved it. And I loved being able to share all that with everybody. And everybody was just so nice, so nice.
Thank you, Carrie. And lastly, Tom said it, the IOCDF resource is good, but lead advocate Chris Tronson and his mom run a family and friends support group out of OCD SoCal. You don't need to be in SoCal. It's over Zoom. You can access it on the IOCDF. I don't know the exact date and time, but it's a wonderful support group. I've spoken at it. And so you can find that information on the IOCDF support group website. And actually on the IOCDF, there's a support group page of literally all the support groups. And so it's a great resources. Last question. It's a great one. At 8:14 p.m., Lisa Doyle writes, I struggle finding the right medical professionals for my husband because his OCD is deeply connected to his Muslim faith. Should cultural and religious background matter in treatment? I've been told no, but I'm not convinced. I hate to say we literally had the Faith and Mental Health virtual conference. So, yeah, I wish you had been able to access that. I'll turn this over to Dr. Storch.
I'm glad you brought it up. And, what's been really exciting, I think, in the last year, 2 years in particular, is really sort of the embracing of religion and spirituality, and conceptualization of OCD and treatment. So not just, appreciating that scrupulosity is one of the common subtypes, but how do we engage professionals, that are working in religious roles to support treatment, to kind of understand our various treatment models and be allies in this regard. So Lisa, I think you sort of nailed it. And it's a constant reminder to me, this message that you're giving of why married men live longer than unmarried men. I guess the same point is I think married women live less long than unmarried women too, because they're taking care of all of us to make sure we get to the right doctors, do the right things, get the right support like you are here. I think your intuition's spot on target. With therapists, physicians, psychologists, what have you, and clergy for that matter, it's sometimes a little bit like dating. And what I mean by that is you may go on a date with someone and it's awesome and that's it. That's all you need. You got one and you're done. You're good to go. But often it's not that way. And you have to go on a couple first date, maybe a second date, and then realize that that's not the fit for you. And then keep trying. The positive, and that's a negative. I mean, it's got to be better. We have to, as a field, reduce variation in care that continues to persist. But I can tell you, having started really in this space 25 years ago professionally, it's so much better now than it was. Like so much better. In Kachu in Canada, it's going to get better too, especially with kind of a strong voice or advocate, on that front. And so again, sometimes it just takes a bit more time. It's getting there, and I think your intuition here is really spot on target.
Thank you, Eric. I'm gonna so hopefully I get it right. I'm going to summon. So my fiance, for those of you who don't know, is a lead advocate, Katie O'Dunn. She's a reverend and specializes in interfaith and mental health. And so I'm going to try to summon what she might say, at least high level in this question, which is the first thing I picked up on your question is connected to his Muslim faith. And I would want to challenge that word to intertwined with his Muslim faith, right? Because I don't know that there's a direct correlation from a connection standpoint between OCD and the Muslim faith, but OCD can become very intertwined in our religious faiths and backgrounds, as Tommy can speak to with his own scrupulosity. So that is not uncommon at all. And, I would wager to say that Katie would definitely say that, especially in treating OCD, we have to be mindful and very respective of cultural accommodations and boundaries and things that doesn't interfere or go against faith traditions and faith beliefs. And so, taking those into account when we're building treatment programs and plans and having literacy around faith traditions is really, really important. Katie, if you're hearing this, you changed me for life. But anyway, so to Eric's point, I think your gut is spot on. I think that it does play a very important role. I think all faith traditions and diversity should be extremely respected and taken into account when engaged in OCD treatment or any type of treatment for that matter. And I think that we can, definitely collaborate and join forces, as Eric said, with clergy and other faith leaders. Oh, Katie jumped on. Yes, I agree with everything you're saying. Just caught the end of it. Okay. Thank you for the reassurance, love. Anyway, so thank you for that question. And Katie will probably comment on, because I scanned her the text, the thread, because I knew she would be like right on that. Anyway, it's 8:31. We're a little bit over time. I just wanted to give final thoughts to the group quickly on family and navigating. Any final last thoughts for our viewers? I'll start with Carrie.
Oh boy. Well, I'm happy to, give my email if any parents want to talk, or, I'm happy to be a resource for anyone, first of all. And secondly, I think just try to educate yourself as much as you can about what OCD is and how to treat it. Because I loved what Ethan said about it being a treatable mental illness. It is. And, I've watched my 15-year-old son go from, curled in a ball to, finishing his master's. So I can tell you that, it's not without struggle, but I do think that, navigating it together is probably a good thing. Communication is very important. But if you're not able to talk to your son, then go talk to somebody. Because if you're not, or your child or your spouse, go talk to someone, because it'll actually help you as well. You have to take care of you. The caregiver has to take care of the caregiver also. Beautifully said, Carrie. Dr. Storch.
Yeah, echoing that, beautifully said. If you have a kid or loved one in treatment, you got to be a part of that treatment. And if you're not, ask them why not. And it might be that the person doesn't want you as part of it, and okay, but you have to be somewhere on that map or road of recovery. And with kids, it should be really that's the default, is that you're a well integrated part of that treatment team, unless there's a good reason why you're not. But again, our default is we start with the family as a unit, and then we move forward from there, which might be peeling off parents because, the kid wants to do it alone, or the parent's super, super anxious or not so positive. But in general, that's one tip. Thank you, Dr. Storch. Tom.
Yeah, I think just reiterating what we've talked about today is that, the family dynamic is important with recovery for OCD. And I think the more you can involve everybody, the better off the treatment will be for the individual with OCD.
Thank you, Tom. Dira.
Yeah, echoing what everyone has said here. I guess the one new thing I would add is, like I said, I'm very fortunate to have family who was very involved, and but if you don't, if your family is resistant or you don't have those links, like, find someone who you can talk to and have some support system so that you're not going at it alone.
And there's some people on here right now, Amy and Alexandra, who have spoken about it. So, if you're hit them up on Facebook, I'm sure they'll be happy to continue the conversation. With that, I know we're over time, so I want to very much thank Dr. Storch, Carrie, Tom, and Adira for spending their Tuesday evening with us, joining us for this really important conversation. As always, I want to thank all of you for watching, for listening, and most importantly, for advocating in the comments. You always have such great insight. So it's very, very much appreciated. As always, I want to thank the IOCDF and Amanda behind the scenes. Registration is open for the 28th annual OCD conference taking place this year in San Francisco. The annual OCD conference is the largest national event focused solely on obsessive compulsive disorder related disorders. You can register at iocdf.org/OCDcon. Also, walk registrations are open this June and October. OCD walks will be taking place across the country. Visit iocdf.org to find a walk near you. Finally, you can visit iocdf.org/peace of mind for all scheduled live streams. With all of that, and of course, if you need resources, questions, comments, anything, you can visit the iocdf.org or email them at info@iocdf.org. With all of that, thank you so much for being here. Stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels. Don't let OCD off the hook. And we'll see you next week. Thanks. Have a good night.